Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are really glad to have you with us today because we're opening a file that, honestly, it reads less like a biography and more like, I don't know, a fever dream.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. It's like a script that was rejected by Hollywood for being just too unbelievable.
Yeah.
If you walked into a studio and pitched a character who is all at once a world-famous poet, a notorious Casanova, a one-eyed fighter pilot, a war hero, and then a dictator who hijacks an entire city to run it on the principles of music, you'd be laughed out of the room.
Oh, absolutely. They'd tell you to pick one, maybe two. It sounds like a composite character, doesn't it? Someone stitched together from like 4 or 5 different historical figures. But no, we are talking about just one man.
Gabriele D'Annunzio.
Gabriele D'Annunzio.
And usually when we do these dives, we can sort of categorize the subject. We can say, okay, today we're looking at a politician or, we're analyzing a military strategist. D'Annunzio seems to actively fight against being put in any kind of box.
He doesn't just fight the box. He decorates it with velvet, sets it on fire, and then flies an airplane through the smoke. I mean, to really understand the early 20th century, and I mean properly understand that weird, dark, energetic shift that ultimately leads to fascism, you have to grapple with this man.
He had all those titles, too.
He did, and they sound like they belong in a fantasy novel, right? The Prince Montenovoso, The Prophet, or Il Profeta, and the one that stuck the most, Il Vate. Il Vate. It translates to the poet, but with this added weight, like the soothsayer or the seer.
The prophet. Wow. That takes a certain level of ego to even accept, let alone encourage.
A level of ego we're going to become very familiar with.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We need to connect the dots. We have to figure out how a man who starts his career writing this incredibly flowery, decadent poetry about, flowers and pleasure, ends up seizing a city by force, writing a constitution that claims music is the central law of the state, arguably inventing the entire visual aesthetic of fascism before Mussolini even got his boots on.
It is a massive, massive trajectory. And to get us there, we've combed through a pretty heavy stack of sources: historical records, biographies, his own letters, political manifestos, military accounts. It's a complex puzzle because you have to look at 3 very different worlds.
Right.
First, there's the high art world of the Decadent movement in the late 1800s. Then, the muddy, bloody reality of the trenches in World War I. And finally, this bizarre political theater he creates in the city of Fiume.
Fiume is the part I'm really itching to get to. The whole idea of a poet-dictator running a rogue state is just, it's completely wild.
It's the centerpiece.
But we have to build the foundation first. We have to understand who this guy was before he decided to become a warlord.
And the enigma starts right at the beginning. You have to picture a man of just extreme contradictions. He was capable of writing the most delicate, sensitive, stuff that can genuinely make you weep with its beauty. And yet he possessed an appetite for violence and risk that would make a stuntman blush.
Extreme sensitivity and extreme violence. Okay, so let's go to the beginning. Pescara, Italy, 1863.
Right. He's born in the Abruzzo region. His father is a man named Francesco Paolo Rapagnetta, who is a very wealthy landowner and the mayor of the town. Now, I suspect you're going to bring up the name issue.
I have to, because I was going through the notes, and this story just kept popping up. The legend that D'Annunzio is a fake name, that he was actually born Gaetano Rapagnetta, and he rebranded himself Gabriele D'Annunzio, because he thought he looked like the Archangel Gabriel.
A very D'Annunzio-esque story.
It is. But is there any truth to it? Because, let's be honest, Rapagnetta sounds a lot less heroic than D'Annunzio.
It does. And his enemies love to use that against him later in life to sort of mock him as this provincial upstart. But we can debunk that right now. The records are crystal clear. His birth certificate says Gabriele D'Annunzio. The confusion and the myth, it actually stems from his father.
Ah, okay. So the father was the one who changed his name.
Exactly. The father was born Francesco Paolo Rapagnetta, but when he was 13, he was adopted by a wealthy, childless uncle named Antonio D'Annunzio. So the father legally took the D'Annunzio name decades before Gabriele was even a thought.
So he really was born D'Annunzio. He didn't invent the name to sound like an angel, even though it fit his ego perfectly.
It was just a happy accident of genealogy for him. But even without a self-invented name, he was clearly a prodigy. He was sent to a really prestigious school, the Liceo Cicognini in Prato, and he published his first volume of poetry, Primo Vere, in 1879.
And he was, what, 16?
16 years old.
That's just I mean, most 16-year-olds are worrying about acne and geometry. He's out there publishing poetry collections.
And not just publishing them into the void, he was incredibly savvy even then. There's a famous story about how he sent a letter to a newspaper pretending to be a friend, announcing his own death in a horse riding accident just to generate buzz for the book.
No way. He faked his own death at 16.
He did. And it worked. People started talking about this tragic young poet. And then, surprise, he's alive and has a book for sale. But the real breakthrough came from a literary critic named Giuseppe Chiarini. Chiarini read this teenager's work and wrote a glowing article that hailed him as an enfant prodigé, a child prodigy. And that review, that one article, basically launched D'Annunzio's career overnight.
He knew how to work the press from day one. So he heads off to Rome, to the Sapienza University in 1881. And this is where the D'Annunzio persona really starts to bake, right? This is where he creates himself.
Rome is where he invents himself. That's the perfect way to put it. He joins all the fashionable literary groups. He writes for papers like Chronica Byzantina, and he adopts this very aristocratic pseudonym, Duca Minimo, the lowest duke, for his journalism.
A bit of false modesty there.
Just a bit. But most importantly, he dives headfirst, completely, into the decadent lifestyle.
Let's pause and define decadent here. Because today, when we say decadent, we're usually talking about a really rich chocolate cake or, a spa day. But in late 19th century literature, it meant something very, very specific.
Very different, yeah. You have to think of the decadent movement and the aestheticism that went with it as a rebellion. It was a rebellion against the naturalism of the time. Naturalism was hugely popular then. It was about gritty reality, scientific observation, writing about the poor, the dirt, the struggle of daily life. Think Émile Zola in France.
Okay, so naturalism is a documentary film. And decadence is what? A perfume commercial directed by a vampire.
That's not far off. Decadence is a fever dream. It's all about sensation, mysticism, beauty for beauty's sake. It loves to explore the darker, more sensual, almost rotting side of human emotion. It's heavily influenced by French symbolism and British aestheticism, Oscar Wilde, but maybe a bit darker, a bit more intense.
So velvet curtains, heavy perfume, moral ambiguity.
All of it. It's art that doesn't try to teach you a lesson about society. It just wants to make you feel something intense, even if that feeling is revulsion or decay.
Perfumed, velvet-draped fever dream. I like that.
Yeah.
It's a good summary.
And that is D'Annunzio to a T. His first big novel, Il Piacere, which gets translated as The Child of Pleasure, came out in 1889. It made him a superstar. Then you get books like The Triumph of Death and The Flame of Life. He created a style that was incredibly complex, filled with archaic words he dug up, all this sensual imagery. He saw himself as resurrecting a more glorious, sensuous Italian language.
And somewhere in this period, he discovers Friedrich Nietzsche, which feels like a pivotal moment.
This is a crucial turning point. Now, whether he truly deeply understood Nietzsche's philosophy or just cherry-picked the parts he liked is, well, it's a matter of debate among scholars.
But he definitely liked one part.
Oh, he latched onto the concept of the Übermensch.
The Superman.
Correct. But, and it's an important but, not a guy in a cape saving cats from trees. The Nietzschean Übermensch is a being who creates his own morality, who rises above the common herd of ordinary people through sheer force of will. D'Annunzio started to see himself and his literary characters as these supermen. You see it clearly in characters like Stelio of Frena in The Flame of Life. They are artists, geniuses, beings destined to dominate others through will, through aesthetics, through their sheer vitality.
That is a very dangerous self-image to cultivate.
It is.
Because if you genuinely believe you are a Superman and that the rules of ordinary people like, say, paying your bills or being faithful to your wife don't apply to you, you're going to leave a lot of wreckage in your wake.
And he did. His life was a trail of wreckage. He lived like a Renaissance prince, but without the bank account to back it up. He was constantly in debt. He bought castles. He had dozens of greyhounds, customized clothes, rare art. By 1910, his debts were so catastrophic that he actually had to flee Italy.
Wait, he pulled a midnight run to France. Just skipped town on his creditors.
He did. He went to Paris to escape. But because he's D'Annunzio, he didn't, hide in some dingy attic. He immediately became the toast of Parisian society. He's collaborating with Claude Debussy, one of the most famous composers in the world, on a musical play called The Martyrdom of Saint Sebastian.
I seem to recall reading that the church wasn't a particularly big fan of that one.
That is the understatement of the century. The Holy See was so offended by the mix of sacred and, frankly, erotic imagery that they placed all of D'Annunzio's works on the Index of Forbidden Books.
All of them.
Every single thing he had ever written was officially banned for Catholics to read.
That's almost an achievement in itself, getting your entire bibliography banned by the Pope. It's like the ultimate badge of honor for a bad boy poet.
It certainly added to his mystique as this dangerous, edgy figure. And he wasn't just writing plays. He worked with the composer Pietro Mascagni on an opera called Parisina. And here's a detail that just screams D'Annunzio. The libretto, the lyrics he wrote for the opera, was so long and so dense that they had to cut an entire act just so the audience wouldn't, fall asleep or leave before the end.
He was incapable of self-editing.
He loved the sound of his own voice, both on the page and off.
And speaking of love, we really can't talk about the poet without talking about the lover. He wasn't just a writer. He was arguably one of the first modern celebrity tabloid stars.
Yeah.
His private life was public property.
His romantic life was pure performance art. He married a noblewoman, Maria Hardwin, in 1883, and they had 3 sons, but he was never, ever going to be a faithful husband. That marriage fell apart pretty quickly. The relationship that really captivated the world was with Eleanora Duse.
And for anyone listening who might not know, Duse wasn't just an actress. She was the actress of her time.
Think Meryl Streep mixed with a global rock star. She was an international icon, famous for her naturalistic style of acting. Their affair lasted from about 1894 to 1910, and it was incredibly passionate, public, and incredibly toxic.
He wrote roles for her, though, right?
He did. He wrote plays specifically for her, like La Città Morta and Francesca da Rimini, which certainly helped her career. But he also cannibalized their relationship for his art.
What do you mean by cannibalized?
He published the novel Il Fuoco, The Flame of Life, which is a fictionalized story about a brilliant younger poet and his affair with an aging actress. It was a thinly veiled and at times very cruel account of his relationship with Duse. He essentially aired all their private moments, her insecurities about her age, everything to the public just to sell books and build his own myth.
That is just unbelievably cool.
It fits the Superman theory, though, doesn't it? My art, my genius, is more important than your feelings. People are just material for the masterpiece that is my life.
And Duse wasn't the only one. There was also the Marchesa Luisa Casati.
Oh, what a character she was. A perfect match for him. She was an eccentric heiress who famously walked pet cheetahs on diamond leashes and wore live snakes as jewelry. Their affair was this turbulent on-again, off-again thing that lasted for decades. She was another one of his great muses.
So it's all one big performance. His personal life, his art, the scandals, it's all part of the D'Annunzio brand.
Exactly. So up until 1914, this is the picture we have. A peacock. A brilliant, scandalous peacock writing flowery books, dating famous women, running up massive debts, and living in a cloud of perfume and controversy in France. If the story stopped there, he'd just be an interesting footnote in literary history.
But then World War I breaks out, and the peacock decides he's actually a hawk.
The warrior poet. This transformation is what truly baffles people and what makes him so historically significant. When the war starts, D'Annunzio returns to Italy. He completely reinvents himself as the loudest, most passionate voice for interventionism. He campaigns aggressively for Italy to abandon its neutrality and join the war on the side of the Triple Entente: Britain, France, and Russia.
And he's not just giving speeches from a balcony. He actually signs up to fight. But he's not some young recruit, is he?
No, he's 52 years old in 1915. He is well past military age. He's a grandfather, for crying out loud, but he volunteers. And he refuses to sit at a desk. He wants to be on the front lines. He had been fascinated by aviation since 1908. He had actually flown with Wilbur Wright himself, so he uses his fame and connections to get himself commissioned as a fighter pilot.
A 52-year-old poet becoming a fighter pilot? It just sounds completely absurd.
It was. But here's the thing. He was genuinely brave. Recklessly, suicidally brave, and he paid the price for it. In 1916, during a rough landing, he wasn't wearing his seatbelt properly, some sources say, because he thought it ruined the line of his custom-tailored uniform, and he smashed his head against the machine gun mount. The injury was severe. He lost the sight in his right eye permanently.
And this is what led to that famous period of him writing in the dark, right? The book Notturno.
Yes. To save the sight in his remaining eye, doctors ordered him to lie in total darkness for months, completely immobile. During that time, he composed Notturno, which means nocturne. He wrote it on thousands of thin strips of paper, blindly scrawling one line at a time, unable to see what he was writing. It's this haunting, fragmented book about pain, sensation, and darkness.
Most people would probably call it a day after an injury like that. A 50-something one-eyed man has earned his retirement from active duty.
Not D'Annunzio. As soon as he could stand up, he was back in the cockpit. He learned to fly and fight with only one eye. And this brings us to the 2 exploits that made him an immortal legend in Italy. The first is the flight over Vienna in August 1918.
I love this story because it is so uniquely, perfectly D'Annunzio. Paint the picture for us.
Okay, so he's the commander of the 87th Fighter Squadron, which they nicknamed La Serenissima, a tribute to the old Venetian Republic. He leads 9 planes on this incredibly dangerous 700-mile round-trip flight over the Alps to Vienna, the capital of the enemy Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, usually, when you fly over an enemy capital during a total war,
You drop bombs.
you drop bombs. You try to destroy infrastructure, instill terror.
But not him.
D'Annunzio didn't drop a single explosive. He dropped paper. Propaganda leaflets. 50,000 of them printed in the green, white, and red of the Italian flag.
Just imagine being a citizen in Vienna. You
Yeah.
hear the air raid sirens, you hear the engines, you look up at the sky, you brace for death, and instead, it rained poetry.
It was a psychological masterstroke. The leaflets basically said, "We are here. We could have bombed you, but we chose not to. We are artists. We are Italians. Your government can't protect you from us." It was a profound humiliation for the Austrian authorities and a massive, massive morale boost back home in Italy. It was style over substance, but in a war of grinding attrition, that kind of style became substance.
And then there was the Bukhar mockery. What was that?
The Beffa di Bukhari. This was a bit earlier, in February 1918. He participates in this daring naval raid. He and 2 other men take 3 small MAS torpedo boats right into a heavily fortified Austrian harbor at Bukhar. Militarily, it was a complete failure.
A failure. I thought it was a famous victory.
It was a propaganda victory. In military terms, their torpedoes got stuck in the defensive nets. They didn't manage to sink any major ships. But the sheer audacity of it, sailing right into the enemy's lair. And before they left, they dropped 3 sealed bottles into the harbor with mocking messages for the Austrian Navy. He turned a tactical failure into another huge PR win.
He really understood the power of the viral moment a century before the internet existed.
He was a master of it, and the military just loaded him with medals. The Gold Medal of Military Valor, which is Italy's highest award for bravery, multiple silver medals, the Military Order of Savoy, the French Legion of Honor, the British Military Cross. The official citations talk about his youthful courage and audacious persistence. By the end of the war, he wasn't just a poet anymore. He was the most famous and decorated soldier in Italy.
So November 1918, the war ends. D'Annunzio is a national hero, a living legend. But peace is boring for a Superman. And Italy, as a nation, is angry.
This is the context we absolutely need for the next chapter, for Fiume. Italy was on the winning side of the war, but the Italian people felt cheated. They called it the Vittoria Mutilata, the mutilated victory.
Why mutilated?
They had joined the war because the Allies, in the secret Treaty of London, had promised them huge chunks of territory from the collapsing Austro-Hungarian Empire. But at the Paris Peace Conference, President Woodrow Wilson and the others pushed back. They were all about national self-determination now and didn't want to just hand over territories with non-Italian populations to Italy.
And the flashpoint for all this anger was the city of Fiume.
Correct. Fiume, which is now Rijeka and modern-day Croatia, was a multicultural port city. The city center itself had a majority Italian-speaking population, but the surrounding suburbs and countryside were overwhelmingly Croatian. The Allies proposed handing the city over to the new kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which would become Yugoslavia.
And D'Annunzio saw this as a betrayal.
A profound betrayal. He saw it as a slap in the face to the 600,000 Italians who had died in the war. He wasn't going to let it stand.
So what does a poet, warrior, aviator do when he's angry at a peace treaty? He doesn't just write a strongly worded letter to the editor.
No. In September of 1919, he goes rogue, completely rogue.
Yeah.
He gathers a force. It starts incredibly small, about 186 grenadiers, who basically mutiny from the Italian Royal Army to follow him. They start to march from a town called Ronchi towards Fiume.
186 men. That's not an army.
It's a parade. But as they march, it snowballs. Soldiers desert their posts to join his column. Veterans, futurist artists, adventurers, they all flock to his banner. By the time he reaches the city gates, he has a force of about 2,500 troops, including the elite Arditi shock troops.
And what about the Allied forces who were occupying the city? The Americans, the British, the French?
They just left. They were completely taken by surprise. The Italian general in charge of the Allied contingent came out to confront D'Annunzio, and D'Annunzio just unbuttoned his coat to reveal all his war medals and said, "Then you will have to fire first on me."
And the general backed down.
He backed down. The Allied forces withdrew. They didn't want to start a shooting war with Italy's greatest war hero over a city. D'Annunzio walked in and took control of Fiume without firing a single shot.
He hijacked a city. An entire city.
He did. He declared it the Italian Regency of Carnaro, and he gave himself the title of Duce Leader. And it's really important to note this is the first time we see that title being used in this modern, charismatic, authoritarian context, years before Mussolini.
Okay, so he's the Duce of Fiume. He's now running a country. What does that actually look like? I'm guessing he wasn't spending his days focused on sanitation policy and tax codes.
It was. It was the wildest political experiment of the 20th century. It lasted for about 15 months. The city became a haven for pirates, artists, rebels, futurists, anarchists, and a lot of cocaine users. It was one long drug-fueled party. But legally, he did try to create a new order. He co-authored a constitution called the Charter of Carnaro with a radical syndicalist named Alceste d'Ambrose.
Syndicalist. Can you just quickly unpack that for us?
Sure. Syndicalism is a form of revolutionary socialism where instead of political parties running the state, society is organized by syndicates, which are basically trade unions. So the charter set up a corporatist structure where everyone belonged to one of 9 corporations based on their job. One for industrial workers, one for farmers, one for professionals, and so on.
9 corporations. But D'Annunzio added a little twist, didn't he?
He added his signature flourish. He created a 10th corporation. The other 9 were for, regular jobs. The 10th corporation had no specific members. It was reserved for superior human beings. It was for the heroes, the poets, the prophets, the supermen, and I quote, the most energetic and audacious geniuses.
So there was a government department for cool people.
Essentially, yes, a state-sponsored club for supermen. And the charter, famously, bizarrely, declared that music was the fundamental principle of the state.
Music. Not justice, not liberty, not equality. Music.
Music. The idea was that the state should function with the harmony and passion of a grand symphony. It was a government based on pure aesthetics. And his foreign policy was just as chaotic. He tried to organize an anti-League of Nations for all the oppressed peoples of the world. He reached out to Irish separatists, Egyptian nationalists, Indians, anyone who wanted to overthrow the British or French empires.
So he's an ardent Italian nationalist, but he's also trying to lead a global anti-colonial revolution. That is incredibly inconsistent.
Consistency was never the goal. Excitement was. And this is where we have to look at the very dark side of this experiment. Because while Fiume might have seemed like a poetic state, it was also the laboratory of fascism. Historians often call D'Annunzio the John the Baptist of fascism.
Why? What specific things did he do there that Mussolini later copied?
Almost everything visual. If you close your eyes and picture a classic fascist rally, you are picturing something D'Annunzio invented in Fiume, the dramatic balcony speech. That was his signature move. He would stand on a balcony and hold these dialogues with the crowd below, asking them questions, getting them to roar back answers in unison.
The Roman salute, the stiff raised arm.
D'Annunzio brought that back from what he believed was ancient Roman history, the black shirts. His elite Arditi shock troops wore black shirts with skull and crossbones emblems. Mussolini saw how effective it was and adopted that exact look for his own squads.
The war cries, too.
The war cry, Ea, 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 Allah. D'Annunzio claimed he took that from the warriors in Homer's Iliad. Mussolini took it directly from D'Annunzio. The whole call and response with the crowd. It was all pioneered in Fiume.
And there was a specific form of torture that also began there, the castor oil.
Yes. This is grim, but it's important. D'Annunzio's men originated the practice of forcing political dissidents and opponents to drink massive amounts of castor oil. It's a powerful, and I mean powerful, laxative.
That sounds almost juvenile, but it was clearly more than just a prank.
It was calculated psychological humiliation. The point wasn't just to make the enemy sick, it was to make them soil themselves in public, to strip them of all dignity. It was a way of saying, you are not a political opponent to be debated, you are a dirty object to be cleansed. Mussolini's black shirts used this tactic on a massive, brutal scale across Italy a few years later.
It's terrifying to think that these things, which became the hallmarks of a brutal totalitarian regime, really started in this so-called city of art.
That's the entire paradox of D'Annunzio. He saw politics as a form of theater. He wanted passion, fervor, myth, beauty. Mussolini was watching from the sidelines, taking careful notes. He realized that these tools, the balcony, the chants, the uniforms, the ritualized violence, were incredibly effective technologies of power. D'Annunzio created the ritual. Mussolini came along and built the church.
So how did the party in Fiume end? Did it just collapse under its own chaotic weight?
It ended in fratricide, really. The Italian government in Rome finally had enough. In late 1920, Italy signed the Treaty of Rapallo with Yugoslavia, which officially settled the border issues and made Fiume a free city, not part of Italy. D'Annunzio, in his arrogance, refused to accept it. He actually declared war on Italy.
But declared war on his own country. That's a bold move for a guy running one city.
A very, very bad move. In December 1920, during what became known as the Bloody Christmas, the Italian Navy sailed into the harbor and bombarded Fiume. An Italian warship fired a shell that actually hit D'Annunzio's palace while he was inside. After 5 days of fighting and dozens of deaths on both sides, D'Annunzio surrendered. He drove out of the city, defeated, and the regency of Carnaro was over.
So the great experiment failed. He gets kicked out. And now we enter the final and maybe strangest phase of his life, the relationship with the man who would take all of his ideas and run with them, Benito Mussolini.
It was a relationship defined by, I think, jealousy, admiration, and fear. You have to remember, in 1920, 1921, D'Annunzio was still much more famous and revered than Mussolini. He was the first Duce. Many of the early fascists actually wanted D'Annunzio to lead their movement, not Mussolini.
So D'Annunzio was a potential rival, a massive threat.
A massive threat. And then a very convenient event occurred. In August 1922, just a couple of months before Mussolini's march on Rome, the event where he seized power, D'Annunzio fell out of a window.
He fell. You're saying that with some skepticism.
Well, that's the official story. He fell from a high window at his villa on Lake Garda. Now, maybe he slipped. He was known to drink. He used cocaine. He was getting older. But the timing is just incredibly suspicious. Many historians, and certainly D'Annunzio himself at times, suspected he was pushed by a fascist agent to get him out of the way.
Defenestration is a very classic way to solve a political problem.
It is. And whether it was an accident or an attempt, it worked. He was badly injured, a skull fracture, broken ribs. He was out of commission for months. By the time he had recovered, Mussolini was the prime minister of Italy. His moment to lead had passed forever.
So Mussolini wins. But he still has this hugely famous, unpredictable, and frankly embarrassing war hero sitting around. How did he handle him?
Mussolini was very clever about it. He had a strategy. He is famously quoted as saying, when you have a rotten tooth, you have two possibilities. Either you pull the tooth or you fill it with gold.
And he chose to fill it with gold.
He filled D'Annunzio with gold. He showered him with state funds. He financed the lavish publication of his complete works. He gave him the title of Prince of Montenevoso in 1924. He paid for the creation of his extravagant villa. He basically bribed him into a golden retirement to stay out of politics and keep his mouth shut.
But did D'Annunzio stay quiet? Or did the tooth keep aching?
For the most part, he stayed in his golden cage. But he had his moments of rebellion. His politics were always fluid, always theatrical. You have to remember, back in 1897, he'd been elected to parliament as a man of the far right. And then one day, he just dramatically walked across the floor of the chamber to join the far left, the socialists, shouting, "I go towards life."
Yeah.
He never really fit into the rigid, disciplined mold of the fascist party.
And there's a really surprising twist involving his feelings about Hitler, right?
This is one of the most fascinating parts of his later life. You would think the inventor of the fascist salute would be a big fan of the Nazis. But D'Annunzio despised Hitler, absolutely despised him. He called him a ferocious clown and a horrible painted pagan.
Really? Why the hostility?
He was a passionate Italian nationalist. He viewed the Germans as the historic enemy of Italy, the barbarians from the north. He didn't buy into the Nordic racial theories at all. In 1933 and 1934, he wrote frantic letters to Mussolini, begging him not to form an alliance with Hitler. He even wrote a satirical pamphlet mocking Hitler's mustache and his screeching voice.
That is not the history we usually hear. We tend to just lump all these guys together.
No, he saw the danger. In 1937, he was old and frail, but he traveled to a train station in Verona to meet Mussolini one last time to try and talk him out of the Axis alliance. He failed, obviously, but he saw the disaster that was coming.
So let's talk about where he spent all that gold Mussolini gave him. He retired to this place he created called Il Vittoriale degli Italiani.
The shrine of the Italian people's victories. It's in Gardoni Riviera on the shores of Lake Garda. And if you think his life was eccentric, you should see his house. It's a national monument in Italy now, and it is a complete trip to visit.
What makes it so strange?
It's a claustrophobic, cluttered, mystical labyrinth. It's part military museum, part library, part temple, part mausoleum. The rooms are deliberately kept very dark. He had sensitive eyes, remember? And they're just crammed with thousands of objects, books, statues, and relics. But the outside is even crazier. He has the actual torpedo boat, the MAS 96 from the Bakar raid, preserved in the gardens.
He kept the boat in his garden.
He kept the boat. He also has the SVA-5 aircraft he flew over Vienna hanging from the ceiling of an auditorium he built. But the wildest thing, by far, is the battleship, the prow of the cruiser Puglia.
A battleship. How to get a battleship in a garden on the side of a lake?
The Italian Navy donated the front third of the warship Puglia to him. He had it dismantled, hauled up the side of a hill by military engineers using a special railway, and reassembled in his garden, with the prow pointing out towards the Adriatic Sea. He used to go up on the deck and fire the cannons on special occasions.
That is the ultimate dictator chic, having a literal battleship in your backyard.
It reflects his mind perfectly. It's grand, it's aggressive, it's theatrical, and it's completely disconnected from everyday reality. He lived there as the strained hermit king, surrounded by relics of his own glory, engaging in bizarre rituals, using drugs, and writing endlessly.
And that's where he died.
Yes. He died of a stroke in March 1938, right at his desk. Mussolini ordered a massive state funeral. It was a huge national event.
Probably the biggest sigh of relief Mussolini ever heaved in his life.
Very likely. The rotten tooth was finally and permanently gone. And Mussolini was now completely free to march Italy into the disaster of World War II without D'Annunzio, the old prophet, chirping in his ear.
So we've covered the poet, the lover, the pilot, the dictator, and the hermit. I mean, it's an exhausting life just to talk about. But let's bring this home for you listening. Why does D'Annunzio still matter today? Why should we care about a dead Italian poet from a century ago?
I think D'Annunzio matters because he unlocked something terrifyingly modern: the raw power of aesthetics in politics. He proved that you didn't need a coherent economic plan or a rational platform to capture the masses. You needed style, you needed emotion, you needed a good story and a catchy chant.
He turned politics into a performance art, the ultimate reality show.
Exactly. He showed the world that if you can capture the imagination of the crowd with beauty, with myth, with spectacle, they will follow you anywhere, even into a disastrous war against their own interests. When we look at modern politics, when we talk about optics or controlling the narrative or the atmosphere of a rally rather than the policy details, all of that traces a direct line back to Fiume.
He was the ultimate influencer before the word even existed. He curated his life, his image, and for a short time, his own country.
And he left a legacy that is just incredibly complicated. He's a literary giant who revolutionized the Italian language. He was a war hero of genuine, undeniable courage. But he was also the architect of a style of politics, a style of dictatorship that caused immense suffering across Europe. He embodied the contradictions of the 20th century, that violent clash between the old world of aristocracy and high art and the new world of mass media, populism, and violence.
It really makes you look at the leaders we watch on our screens today differently, doesn't it? How much of what we see is substance and how much is just the balcony speech, the clever chant, the Allah.
That is the question D'Annunzio forces us to ask every single day. And I think somewhere he would be absolutely delighted that we're still talking about him, still puzzled by him, almost a century after his death. The show goes on.
You definitely would.
Yeah.
Well, that's our deep dive on Gabriele D'Annunzio, the man who lived a dozen lives and filled them all with gold, poetry, and castor oil. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.